What looked like a routine international flight layover at London Heathrow was actually a devastating metaphor for a psychological and public relations exile. Hidden behind the scratched glass of a commercial aircraft cabin, Meghan Markle sat in absolute silence, refusing to step foot onto the soil of the nation she once claimed she would modernize. She did not leave the plane. Instead, the ultimate confirmation of her current global standing was reduced to a cardboard anniversary note handed to her by flight attendants, paid to serve her a small, forced gesture of praise she immediately shared with the internet to mask an agonizing truth. In less than 6 years, the dazzling illusion of global royalty has collapsed into an insular, deeply anxious battle for basic digital validation. This video will unpack the precise mechanics of this modern tragedy. We will dismantle the quiet, devastating public relations counterattack executed by the House of Windsor, expose the staggering moral contradictions of the Sussexes' latest international campaigns, and trace the chronological path that led a prince and his wife from the pinnacle of soft power to a state of profound commercial desperation. By the end, you will understand not just the mechanics of a multi-million-dollar branding collapse, but the chilling psychological isolation that occurs when an empire built on victimhood finally runs out of currency. To understand the weight of this current exile, we must return to the golden era. There was a moment in 2018 when the Sussex brand was arguably the most valuable cultural commodity on earth. They possessed an intoxicating mix of institutional mystique and Hollywood charisma. They were billionaires of global goodwill. The world looked at Meghan Markle and saw a transformative figure, a woman who could bridge the ancient traditions of the British monarchy with the progressive ideals of a modern, globalized audience. Their wealth was guaranteed, their security was absolute, and their platform was unparalleled. This was not just privilege, it was a historical blank check. To see that blank check reduced to digital grocery store receipts, desperate social media validation, and empty rooms in European capitals is a masterclass in psychological warfare and public relations mismanagement. The fractures in the illusion began to widen long before the recent international missteps. By January, the reality of life outside the palace gates had begun to harden into a cold commercial crisis. For Prince Harry, the crown jewel of his post-royal identity has always been the Invictus Games, an initiative born of genuine compassion and military brotherhood. But the machinery of a multi-million-dollar brand requires more than good intentions. It requires institutional stability. Word began to leak from internal circles that top-tier leadership was quietly resigning, exhausted by an erratic organizational direction. Then came the devastating commercial blow. Boeing, a cornerstone global sponsor, quietly bowed out of the Games. This was not merely a loss of funding, it was a profound psychological rupture for a man whose entire sense of self-worth is tethered to his proximity to the royal family. Mimicking the duties of a working royal through pseudo-royal tours became a necessity for survival. He needed to look like a prince because, without the institutional armor of the monarchy, he is a private citizen navigating an unforgiving capitalist landscape. Harry had become a lost soul wandering the global stage, desperate to find a niche where he could lay his heavy head and do some measurable good, yet permanently cut off from the very apparatus that makes royal philanthropy effective. While the Sussexes wrestled with the harsh realities of corporate sponsorship, the institution they left behind was quietly demonstrating the difference between flash-in-the-pan celebrity and centuries of institutional breeding. In Northern Ireland, King Charles III was navigating a 3-day public engagement tour. In a moment that could have fractured a lesser public figure's dignity, a seagull deposited its droppings directly onto the back of the king's tailored jacket. A lesser man or a hyper-anxious celebrity obsessed with visual perfection might have thrown a temper tantrum or retreated from the crowds. Instead, Charles smiled, cracked a dry, off-the-cuff joke, noting at least it did not land on his head, and continued, shaking hands with his future subjects. That small detail matters immensely. It was a direct, effortless contrast to the infamous pen incident during his accession, a moment where grief and exhaustion had made him look brittle and temperamental. By taking a literal moment of visual humiliation and neutralizing it with self-deprecating wit, Charles reminded the world of what royalty actually is: an unbothered, enduring stoicism. It echoed the legendary moment in 1994 when an assassin fired shots at him on a stage in Australia, and the then prince merely turned, adjusted his cufflink, and remained completely unmoved. That is breeding. That is the mystique of the monarchy, the profound, internal certainty that no external chaos can alter your position. But the real institutional counterattack did not come from a humorous interaction with wildlife. It came from an unprecedented financial and social maneuver by the new Prince of Wales. Prince William found himself facing a severe public relations crisis following a grueling investigative report by Channel 4, which accused the Duchy of Cornwall, his private £1.3 billion estate, of acting like an aggressive, cold-hearted commercial property empire, squeezing high rents from vulnerable tenants while offering zero financial transparency. The moral outrage was potent. A future king presiding over a housing crisis, while sitting on a medieval land fortune, was a lethal narrative line. William did not issue an angry defensive statement or hide behind attorneys. Instead, he executed a brilliant calculated pivot that effectively silenced his Republican critics. He announced a radical plan to sell off roughly a fifth of the duchy's vast land portfolio, directing a staggering £500 million over the next decade to build up to 12,000 affordable, environmentally sustainable homes. His team released a calculated, high-minded phrase: the prince had decided the duchy should not exist merely to own land, but first and foremost to have a positive impact on the world. This was the ultimate expression of the welfare monarchy, putting hundreds of millions of actual dollars where his mouth was, solving a tangible crisis instead of merely complaining about it from a California mansion. The contrast was devastatingly clear to global audiences. While William was engineering structural solutions to Britain's housing shortage, Prince Harry was giving paid speeches attacking global political figures and writing sweeping indictments of British society. The psychological reality of Harry's position became undeniable by trying to play a global political statesman while stripped of diplomatic immunity and institutional neutrality. He had alienated both sides of the aisle. He had become a private citizen, playing a dangerous, high-stakes game of political commentary, completely detached from the quiet, apolitical charm that once made him the most beloved prince of his generation. This brings the chronology to the most striking public relations. Collapse of the season: Meghan Markle's recent appearance in Geneva, Switzerland. Billed by her team as a triumphant humanitarian intervention, the visit was, in reality, a chaotic attempt to recover from a disastrous public reception in Australia weeks prior. The Swiss, widely regarded as the most cool-headed, sensible, and royalty-indifferent population in the world, responded with a collective, deafening silence. There were no adoring crowds, no cheering onlookers, and, crucially, not a single line of coverage in the major European print newspapers. While thousands turned out in Italy for a 3-day visit by Catherine, the Princess of Wales, occupying massive spreads in the daily papers, Meghan's presence in Geneva was a ghost town. But the lack of physical crowds was nothing compared to the staggering moral contradiction that unfolded on the global stage. Meghan stood before her audience to lecture the world on the profound dangers of social media and artificial intelligence, specifically focusing on the toxic psychological impact these technologies have on vulnerable children. Yet mere weeks earlier, the public had watched in astonishment as Meghan announced her new AI-driven shopping application, a platform designed to allow users to instantly purchase the luxury garments she was wearing while sitting directly next to cancer victims. The juxtaposition was chilling, using a humanitarian backdrop to drive consumer data and algorithmic sales, while simultaneously warning the world about the evils of digital exploitation. To make matters worse, while decrying the invasive, toxic nature of social media platforms, she continuously feeds those exact platforms with highly curated images of her own daughter. Lilibet implicitly asking the public to like, subscribe, and share. It is a psychological loop of profound insecurity, condemning the monster, while desperately begging for its applause. This is where the narrative line hardens into a tragic realization. The Sussex Empire is no longer fighting for historical relevance. They are fighting for commercial survival, trapped in a cycle where every attempt to manufacture a royal moment only exposes the empty space where their institutional power used to be. And as the summer approaches, the tension within the walls of their California estate has reached a boiling point. Prince Harry is desperately trying to orchestrate a triumphant return to the United Kingdom for the upcoming Invictus Games event in Birmingham, begging his family to show up for a public reconciliation. But the British government's Security Committee remains completely unmoved, refusing to grant them automatic armed police protection. Meghan Markle's answer has already been delivered through the quiet, icy leaks of her public relations camp. She will not set foot in Britain. She is terrified, not of security threats, but of something far more damaging to a global celebrity brand, the sound of public booing echoing through the streets of London. A vocal rejection that no curated social media post or cardboard flight attendant note can ever erase. The prince stands completely alone at a point of no return, caught between a wife who refuses to look back and a royal family that has officially learned how to thrive in their absolute absence. To understand the profound isolation of Prince Harry's current reality, you have to look at the empty space where his family used to be. The upcoming Invictus Games in Birmingham was supposed to be a triumphant homecoming, a moment where the prodigal son returns to British soil backed by the unassailable virtue of a military charioteer. Instead, it is shaping up to be a devastating visual metaphor for a severed lineage. By demanding automatic armed police protection and orchestrating a public standoff with the government security committee, Harry has painted himself into a corner. He has created a scenario where his wife can comfortably refuse to attend, citing safety fears, while masking her actual fear of facing a fiercely hostile British public. This creates a massive, undeniable divide within the marriage itself, even if it remains fiercely hidden behind carefully curated public appearances. Meghan has completely emotionally and geographically detached from the United Kingdom. Her eyes are fixed on the American commercial landscape, pivoting desperately toward lifestyle brands, podcast appearances, and digital monetization. She is trying to build a future in the only ecosystem she understands, which is Hollywood celebrity. Harry, conversely, is entirely trapped in the past. He is a man perpetually fighting ghosts, waging endless legal wars against British tabloids, demanding apologies from a family that has moved on, and trying to reconstruct a royal identity without the royal machinery. They are walking down two completely different psychological paths, tethered together only by the rapidly depreciating brand of their shared titles. That depreciation is exactly why their corporate partners are growing restless. The recent announcement that the Sussexes are adapting a harrowing true story about the war in Afghanistan for Netflix is a textbook example of commercial desperation masquerading as high art. On the surface, commentators have framed this as a subtle clapback to political figures, who recently disparaged the military contributions of international forces. But if you strip away the political theater, the underlying truth is much darker and much more urgent. Netflix did not pay a fortune for political commentary. They paid for exclusive premium content. With previous project announcements quietly vanishing into the void and major executives walking away from their production company, this military film adaptation is not a passion project. It is a lifeline. If this fails to materialize, or if it fails to capture an audience, the streaming giant will have every justification to sever the contract, effectively ending the Sussexes' reign as Hollywood producers. This is where the story shifts from a simple celebrity downfall to a masterclass in psychological warfare. The House of Windsor has executed a brilliant, ruthless strategy of weaponized silence. When the Sussexes launch a new product drop, a tell-all interview, or orchestrate a controversial international tour, the palace does not retaliate with press releases. They retaliate with duty. They send the Princess of Wales out to a highly publicized, deeply traditional engagement where she is swarmed by thousands of adoring citizens. They send the Prince of Wales out to pledge £500 million to cure homelessness. They allow the king to stand in the rain joke with the public and project absolute, unshakable stability. By refusing to engage in the drama, the palace forces Harry and Meghan to fight in a vacuum. And without the royal family to push against the Sussex narrative collapses, the weaponization of victimhood only works if there is a visible oppressor. When the supposed oppressors are simply going to work cutting ribbons and ignoring you completely, the victim narrative starts to look suspiciously like a prolonged, highly profitable tantrum. This is why the public mood has shifted so violently. We are no longer watching a brave couple escaping a toxic institution. We are watching two highly privileged individuals struggling to maintain their relevance in a ruthless attention economy. The audience has realized that the Sussexes did not flee the spotlight. They merely tried to change the lighting. But in doing so, they traded the enduring historical prestige of the British monarchy for the fleeting transactional nature of American celebrity. In the royal family, your value is inherent. You are relevant simply because you exist within the bloodline. In the celebrity ecosystem, you are only as valuable as your last project, your last headline, and your last streaming hit. That subtle shift is what makes this story resonate so deeply with millions of viewers. It is not just about a family feud or the illusion of power. It is a cautionary tale about identity. It asks a devastating question: what happens when you strip away the institution that defined you, only to discover that you do not have the architecture to stand on your own? Prince Harry traded a legacy of quiet duty for a microphone, only to realize that the world is slowly stopping to listen. As we look toward the future, the true tragedy of the Sussexes may not be a sudden, dramatic explosion, but rather a slow, quiet fade into irrelevance. They will likely continue to announce grand projects, release carefully lit photographs, and embark on pseudo-royal tours in countries that will have them. But the empty streets of Geneva and the unopened cardboard notes on commercial airplanes tell the real story. The golden era is over. What remains is a permanent, exhausting hustle to convince the world that they still matter. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the psychology and the unspoken truths behind the headlines. If you found this analysis insightful, please take a moment to subscribe. Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and share this with someone who appreciates the story behind the story. Until next time, keep looking beyond the illusion